The gavel fell like an executioner's axe, the crack of wood against wood, a final deafening punctuation mark to the life Sergeant Jack Callahan once knew. The word came next, a single syllable delivered with the cold, impersonal weight of the entire United States military justice system. Guilty. It was a hammer blow, not to his body, but to his very soul. For a man like Jack, an Army Ranger who had bled for the flag and measured his worth in honor, that word was a poison more lethal than any bullet. Traitor. The title seared itself into his identity, erasing everything he had ever been. He stood rigid, his jaw set like stone, refusing to give the court the satisfaction of seeing him break. But inside, a hero's heart was shattering into a million pieces. His world, once defined by the clear, hard lines of duty and brotherhood, had dissolved into a gray fog of betrayal. Across the sterile, silent courtroom, a pair of amber eyes watched him, missing nothing. Ghost, his former military working dog, sat at perfect attention beside a handler. He wasn't just a German shepherd, he was a soldier, a silent shadow who had navigated the treacherous landscapes of Afghanistan at Jack's side. Ghost had seen Jack at his strongest, his most vulnerable, his most heroic. He had shared rations, slept in the dirt beside him, and stood as a sentinel while he grieved for fallen comrades. That dog knew the truth of Jack Callahan's character in a way no human in this room ever could. The thought of never again feeling the reassuring weight of Ghost's head on his knee was an agony that eclipsed the prospect of a lifetime behind bars. This was the true sentence, the severing of the one untainted bond he had left in the world. As the military police moved to escort him out, Jack's training took over. His voice, though strained, was steady and clear, cutting through the suffocating silence. "Your Honor." All movement ceased. The judge, a decorated general whose face was a roadmap of past conflicts, paused and looked down from the bench. "I request one final moment," Jack stated, not pleaded. "Permission to say goodbye to my K9 partner." A current of surprise ran through the gallery. It was a breach of protocol, a moment of raw humanity in a process designed to strip it away. The prosecutor began to object, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. He saw something in Callahan's eyes, not the defiance of a guilty man, but the deep, unwavering loyalty of a soldier to his brother in arms. He gave a single, curt nod. "You have 2 minutes, Sergeant." The leash was unclipped. In a heartbeat, Ghost was a silent, fluid projectile, his claws clicking a desperate rhythm on the polished floor. Jack fell to one knee, the clank of his cuffs a jarring sound as he opened his arms. Ghost crashed into him, a whirlwind of fur and devotion. Jack wrapped his arms around the dog, burying his face in the thick fur that still smelled faintly of desert dust and home. "I'm sorry, Ghost," he choked out, the words a raw whisper meant only for the dog. "I failed you, buddy. I failed." It was a confession of defeat, an admission of a guilt he did not own, but whose consequences he now bore. Ghost whimpered, a low, guttural sound of shared pain. He pressed his massive head into Jack's chest, a gesture of absolute comfort. But then, something changed. The dog's body went rigid. The comforting nuzzle became an urgent, frantic search. His wet nose, an instrument that had detected hidden explosives and unseen enemies, began to work feverishly along the shoulder of Jack's dress uniform. This wasn't the uniform he had been arrested in. This was his formal service uniform, a gift from his former commander and mentor, Colonel Marcus Thorne, who had insisted he wear it to his sentencing hearing. "Show them the man you are, Jack," Thorne had said, his voice thick with false sympathy. "Let them see the hero, not the prisoner." Now, that supposed symbol of honor was the focus of Ghost's frantic attention. The dog began to whine, a high-pitched sound of alarm, and pawed insistently at a thick reinforced seam on the shoulder epaulette. A low growl started deep in his chest. This wasn't the sound of a sad dog. It was the sound of a working dog who had found something, a threat. "Sergeant, get your dog under control," one of the MPs said, stepping forward. But Jack felt it, a small, hard anomaly beneath the layers of fabric, something he had never noticed. "Hold on," he commanded, his voice sharp with a sudden, electrifying premonition. He tried to angle his body to see what Ghost had found. The dog, sensing his handler's urgency, gave a sharp, powerful tug, and with the sound of tearing thread, a tiny piece of the seam came loose. The MP, his curiosity now piqued, knelt. "What the hell?" he muttered. He ran a gloved finger over the spot and felt the distinct outline of a small foreign object embedded within the uniform itself. The prosecutor sighed dramatically. "Your Honor, this is becoming a circus." "Silence!" the judge snapped, his eyes locked on the unfolding drama. The MP pulled a small utility tool from his belt and, with the precision of a surgeon, sliced the remaining threads. He pinched the fabric and pulled it back. Something tiny and black, no bigger than a fingernail, fell from the shredded seam, its landing on the marble floor, a single sharp clink that echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. In the dead silence that followed, everyone stared at the object. It was a micro-data chip, an object that had no business being sewn into the uniform of a decorated soldier. A wave of confusion and suspicion washed over the room. The prosecutor's face paled, his blustering objections dying in his throat. Jack stared at the chip, and then at Ghost, who now sat calmly at his side, his duty done. 1,000 questions exploded in Jack's mind, but one rose above them all, sharp and terrifying. This uniform was a gift from Thorne, a final gesture of respect, he'd called it. But now Jack understood. It wasn't a gift. It was a cage. It was the final, perfect piece of a frame-up, a betrayal so deep and so intimately delivered, it defied comprehension. A desperate, impossible flicker of hope ignited in the ruins of his soul. That chip wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of his war. If you've ever known a loyalty so fierce it could uncover a truth hidden from the entire world, then hit that subscribe button. You are about to witness how the bond between one man and his dog can unravel a conspiracy that reaches the highest pillars of power. The fight for Jack Callahan's honor has just begun. The discovery of the data chip was a spark in a powder keg. Within the hour, it was the focus of a frantic, high-level analysis in a sterile forensics lab, a place where truth was supposed to be quantifiable, broken down into bits and bytes. But the truth of this chip was a ghost. Its contents were a digital scream of chaos, heavily encrypted files that defied access, a string of geographic coordinates that pointed to forgotten and forbidden corners of the globe, and a single heavily corrupted audio file. For 2 days, technicians worked to peel back the layers of distortion. What they salvaged was less than 5 seconds long. It was a voice, electronically manipulated into a robotic growl, speaking words that would change everything. Nightingale is a go. Casualties acceptable. The file landed on the desk of Captain Eva Rostova. In the rigid hierarchical world of the Judge Advocate General's Corps, Rostova was a force of nature. She was a brilliant legal mind, a woman who believed in the U.S. Army and its systems of justice with an almost religious fervor. Her father had been a command sergeant major. She was raised on the gospel of procedure, honor, and the unimpeachable integrity of the chain of command. To her, the Jack Callahan case was a tragic but necessary amputation, cutting away a diseased limb to save the body. The data chip was an anomaly, a final desperate spasm from a guilty man. Her job was to categorize it, dismiss it, and close the book on Sergeant Callahan, forever. Far from the courtroom, Colonel Marcus Thorne sat in his study, the rich scent of leather and old books, a stark contrast to the cold anxiety gripping him. On a large screen, a news anchor discussed the bizarre courtroom discovery. Thorne's face was a mask of placid concern, but his hand trembled slightly as he lifted a glass of whiskey. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, flashed in his mind. The feel of the tiny chip between his thumb and forefinger. The practiced ease with which he slipped it into the shoulder seam of the uniform. He had meant for it to be found eventually, but on his terms. It was designed to be his final checkmate, a piece of nonsensical data that, when discovered, would paint Callahan as even more unhinged, a man fabricating evidence and weaving paranoid fantasies. He had planned for every contingency, every legal move, every psychological weakness. He had not planned for the dog. The meeting between Captain Rostova and Sergeant Callahan took place in a small windowless room that smelled of disinfectant and despair. "The data is inconclusive," Rostova began, her voice crisp and professional as she laid out the forensics report. "The audio is too distorted to be identified, and the coordinates are for defunct black sites. Legally, this is a dead end." Jack leaned forward, the chains on his wrists clinking softly. He didn't even glance at the report. His eyes were locked on hers, burning with an intensity she found unsettling. "Play it again," he commanded. She sighed and tapped her tablet. The robotic voice filled the small room. "Casualties acceptable. That's Thorne," Jack said, his voice a low growl. "I don't need a voice analysis. I know his cadence. I know the rhythm of his orders. I've followed that voice into hell and back. That's him." Rostova's professionalism bordered on pity. "Sergeant, with all due respect, what you know and what I can prove are two different worlds. Your conviction, however strong, is not evidence. You're making an accusation against a decorated field-grade officer based on a gut feeling. A gut feeling is what kept my men and me alive for 2 tours. Jack shot back, his voice rising. "It's what a soldier trusts when his equipment fails and the intel is wrong. That man, your decorated officer, handed me that uniform and looked me in the eye. He used our history, our brotherhood, to put a nail in my coffin. You talk about evidence. I'm telling you about betrayal. It has a feel, Captain, a weight, and it's all over this." Meanwhile, at the MWD kennels, Ghost was fighting his own war. He was a creature of purpose and instinct, and his purpose was gone. He refused to eat. He snarled at every handler who approached, his powerful body coiled like a spring of pure, frustrated energy. Only one man could get close, a retired kennel master everyone called Sarge, who had been brought in when no one else could handle the dog. Sarge sat quietly outside Ghost's run, not speaking, just watching. He recognized the look in the dog's eyes. It was the same look he'd seen in soldiers, just back from the front, a burning, restless intelligence looking for a mission, a problem to solve. "He ain't grieving, he's hunting," Sarge said to a younger handler. "Something's out of place, and he's the only one who knows it." Rostova left the prison feeling a disquieting mix of frustration and a strange, unwelcome flicker of doubt. Jack Callahan was either a brilliant manipulator or a man so thoroughly convinced of a conspiracy that he was unshakable. Both possibilities were unnerving. Back in the pristine order of her office, she tried to draft her final recommendation, the one that would dismiss the appeal and bury the case. But the words felt hollow. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. The system is strong, Eva, because it's built on truth, but it's run by men. Never forget that. On an impulse she couldn't explain, she typed a new request into her terminal. Access request, Operation Nightingale, classified. Level 8 clearance. She knew the file would be heavily redacted, that it would likely confirm the official story. She told herself she was just doing her due diligence, gathering the evidence to refute Callahan's fantasy once and for all. But as she hit enter, a deeper truth resonated within her. The official report on Nightingale was too clean, too perfect, a mission with dead rangers and a single convenient scapegoat. It was a perfectly constructed narrative. And in her experience, the truth was never, ever perfect. It was messy. It was contradictory. It was ugly. For the first time in her stellar career, Captain Eva Rostova was beginning to suspect that she was on the wrong side of the truth. She didn't know it yet, but her war had just begun. The digital walls of the United States Army were closing in on Captain Eva Rostova. Every attempt to access the unredacted file on Operation Nightingale was met with a new, more impenetrable barrier. A file accessible yesterday was suddenly reclassified to a level far above her clearance. A phone query was met with a polite but firm voice, explaining the records had been transferred to a secure archive for national security review. It was a coordinated, systemic stonewalling. The conspiracy wasn't just hiding, it was actively fighting back, using the very bureaucracy she revered as a weapon against her. Frustration burned in her chest, a hot, unfamiliar anger. The system she had built her life upon was actively working to protect a lie. If the front door was barred, she would find a back door. Her search shifted to the periphery, to the human debris left in the wake of the Nightingale disaster. One name stood out: Private Miller, the key witness against Jack Callahan, whose testimony had been systematically shredded in court and who had been cast out of the Army like a broken tool. Miles away, in the quiet discipline of the MWD kennels, another hunt was underway. It was a hunt not of logic, but of instinct. Kennel Master Sarge had seen enough. He knew Ghost wasn't just a grieving dog, he was an operator without a mission. "All right, Ghost," Sarge finally said, clipping a lead to the dog's collar. "Show me what you're looking for." He let the dog lead, and the powerful shepherd moved with a purpose that was both chilling and magnificent. Ghost pulled him past the training fields, past the barracks, to a cavernous, forgotten storage warehouse at the far end of the base. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of dust, mildew, and memories. Ghost ignored racks of standard-issue gear and moved with unerring certainty toward a single dented, unmarked locker in the back corner. He began to paw at the metal door, a low, intense whine rumbling in his chest. Sarge pried the rusted door open. Inside was a jumble of discarded field equipment. Ghost plunged his head in and emerged with a single object in his mouth, a leather leash. It was beautifully made, but clearly civilian, its edges worn, the brass clip tarnished. It was nothing, and it was everything. Sarge took a photo and sent it to Rostova with a simple message. "The dog found this. Thought you should see it." Rostova's search for Miller had led her deep into the Appalachian Mountains, a world away from the starched order of Washington, D.C. She found him in a dilapidated cabin, surrounded by a perimeter of crude but effective warning traps. The man who answered the door was a ghost of a soldier, his eyes wide with a permanent hunted terror. He held a shotgun with hands that never stopped trembling. It was only the mention of Jack's name that got her through the door. His story came out in a torrent of broken sentences and haunted memories. "It was a ghost hunt," Miller stammered, his gaze darting toward the windows. "They sent us in to get slaughtered. It was a trade, our lives for a clear path. Thorn's path." He spoke of an arms smuggling operation, of insurgents armed with American-made weapons. He was the only one who had questioned the intel, the only one who had seen Thorn meeting with men who didn't belong. For his trouble, they had destroyed him, labeling him a paranoid schizophrenic, turning his own mind into a prison. Thorn was a peacock, Miller whispered, a flicker of angry memory in his eyes. So proud. He even had this fancy dog he kept on an off-base kennel. A show dog, not a war dog. Had this custom leather leash for it. Stupid thing to remember, right? Rostova listened, her heart aching for this broken man. He was living proof of the conspiracy's ruthlessness. As she drove back down the winding mountain road, Miller's words echoed in her head. Her phone buzzed. It was Sarge's message. She pulled the car over, the tires crunching on the gravel shoulder. She opened the photo. On her screen was the image of the worn leather leash, a custom leather leash. The pieces slammed together in her mind with the force of a physical impact. The instinct of a dog in a dusty warehouse had just intersected with the haunted memory of a broken soldier in a mountain shack. This was no longer a theory. It was a tangible thread. The scent of betrayal, detected only by Ghost, was now a physical object in her hand, a direct link to the secret life of a powerful and dangerous man. She finally had her proof, a truth forged not in a lab, but in loyalty and trauma. But she also knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she was holding a declaration of war. She had the word of a man the world considered insane, and a clue found by an animal. Against her stood a decorated colonel, a powerful corporation, and the entire weight of a system designed to protect its own. The fight for the truth was no longer a legal battle. It was a war against ghosts, and she was standing on the front line. The powerful will always try to silence the inconvenient truths spoken by the forgotten. How many times have we seen the words of the powerless dismissed? If you believe that truth is worth fighting for, no matter the odds, let us know in the comments. Your voice joins a chorus that cannot be ignored. The enemy network, once a formless shadow, began to constrict around Captain Eva Rostova like a boa. The first pressure point was official, a summons from her commanding officer, a man whose office was lined with flags and commendations, symbols of the very system she believed in. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he was worse. He was paternal. "Ava," he began, his voice smooth as polished brass. "Colonel Thorn is a man of immense integrity, a war hero. These inquiries of yours, they could be misinterpreted. A young, ambitious officer chasing ghosts can do irreparable damage to a fine career. Let it go." The message was delivered with a warm smile, but his eyes were as cold and hard as granite. It was a command wrapped in a friendly warning. The second pressure point was a whisper campaign. Suddenly, files she needed were delayed. Junior officers who once snapped to attention now avoided her gaze in the hallways. Her reputation, once pristine, was now tainted by whispers of insubordination, of emotional instability. She was being isolated, the system methodically cutting her off from its support, leaving her an island in an ocean of hostility. But the final attack was not on her career. It was on her soul. She came home late one night to her quiet apartment, a sanctuary of order and logic. The door was unlocked. She drew her service weapon, her heart hammering against her ribs, and cleared the rooms, every nerve on fire. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was stolen, and that was the most terrifying part. Then she saw it. On the crisp, white pillow of her perfectly made bed lay a single, gleaming 9mm bullet. It was a violation, a statement of absolute power. It said, "We were here. We can get to you anytime, anywhere. We are inside your life. Stop." In that moment, fear warred with fury inside her, and fury won. They thought this would break her. Instead, they had just forged her resolve into a weapon. This is the moment of truth that defines a person. When the system you trust turns on you, when the shadows have a key to your front door, what do? Do you retreat into the safety of silence, or do you stand your ground for a truth that might cost you everything? Let us know in the comments what courage means to you. While Rostova fought the enemy in the world, Jack Callahan fought it in his mind. Confined to a 6-by-9-foot cell, he turned his prison into a mental battlefield. They had taken his freedom, but they couldn't take his mind. He closed his eyes, and he was back in the dust and heat of Afghanistan, reliving every second of Operation Nightingale. It was a self-inflicted torture, forcing his mind through the trauma again and again. But this time, he wasn't a soldier. He was a forensic analyst. He mapped every command, every radio crackle, every gust of wind, every shouted order. He sketched timelines on the concrete floor with a piece of loose stone, his mind a whirlwind of tactical data. He was hunting for the lie, not the big lie. He already knew that. He was hunting for the small lie, the tiny, insignificant crack in Thorne's perfect narrative, the one detail that would bring the whole rotten structure crashing down. He was fighting the only way he could, turning his memory into a weapon and his cell into a command post. The physical key, meanwhile, was undergoing its own analysis. Sarge, the old kennel master, had pulled every string he had. He'd convinced a contact at a high-tech army research lab to analyze the leather treatment on the leash Ghost had found. It's for a new program, he'd lied, testing scent markers on non-standard materials. The scientist, intrigued, ran it through a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer. The results were immediate and baffling. The leather was treated with a custom oil infused with Helichrysum italicum, the Corsican immortelle flower. It was an incredibly rare and expensive blend, something a connoisseur would use, not the military. It was a signature. A digital search cross-referenced the compound with importers and suppliers. The search yielded a single hit: a bespoke leather working shop in rural Virginia that catered to the ultra-wealthy and powerful. The shop's client list was a fortress, but a JAG captain's subpoena, wielded with the righteous fury of a woman scorned, was the key. Rostova's hands were steady as she scanned the list faxed to her secure line. Her eyes found the first name, and a grim satisfaction settled in her. Colonel Marcus Thorne. It was the confirmation, but it was the next name, just 2 lines down, that made the floor drop out from under her. Andrew Vale, CEO, Argent Defense. The enemy suddenly had a face, and it was the face of the military-industrial complex itself. Argent Defense was a global behemoth, a corporate titan that sold weapons, trained soldiers, and shaped foreign policy in the quiet, carpeted boardrooms of power. They didn't just supply the war, they profited from it. Thorne wasn't just a rogue officer, he was a corporate asset. In his cell, Jack's eyes snapped open. He'd found it. A single 7-second discrepancy in the satellite comms log. A transmission delay that was impossible given their location unless a third-party mobile relay had been in the area. A non-military relay. At that exact moment, the door to the interrogation room opened. It was Rostova. Her face was pale, but her eyes were lit with a fierce, cold fire. Before he could speak, she slid a folder across the table. On the top sheet was a picture of a smiling, silver-haired man. "Sergeant," she said, her voice low and steady, "I think you need to meet Andrew Vale." The unseen enemy was unseen no more. They had a name for the hurricane, and they knew it was heading straight for them. The chessboard was set, but the pieces were human souls. In a cold, secure room, the plan for the last stand was born, not of strategy, but of desperation. The target was no longer just evidence. It was a confession, a truth torn directly from the mouth of the serpent himself, Colonel Marcus Thorne. And the bait was Private Miller, a man already broken by Thorne's ambition. The moral cost of their plan hung heavy in the air. Eva Rostova, the lawyer, saw it as a calculated risk, a necessary evil to achieve a greater good. But for Jack Callahan, it felt like a betrayal of his own code. He was a commander of men, and he was about to send one of his most vulnerable soldiers back into the fire. "I've seen what he does to people who trust him," Jack argued, his voice a low, rough growl. "We're using Miller like a lamb tied to a stake." "Thorne is a predator, Jack," Rostova countered, her own voice hard with a newfound resolve. "And the only way to catch a predator is to give him something he wants to eat. Miller is our only way in." She was right. They were out of moves, outgunned by a system that Thorne controlled like a puppeteer. Miller, his face a mask of terror and determination, agreed. The ghost of Operation Nightingale had haunted him for years. This was his one chance to exercise it. He would wear a wire. He would offer Thorne a fabricated prize, a data drive he supposedly recovered with the real flight recorder data from Nightingale. He would become the bait. Thorne, in his monumental arrogance, took it. He chose the location himself, a sprawling, decommissioned military training ground miles from anywhere. A concrete ghost town where an army had once practiced for war. It was the same ground where Thorne had briefed Jack's unit before sending them into the hell of Operation Nightingale. He was choosing to perform this execution on the very stage where he had written the first act of his betrayal. He wanted to savor the irony. The journey to the training ground was a silent pilgrimage into the past. As they drove, the landscape transformed into a skeletal wasteland of abandoned barracks and hollowed-out concrete structures, their empty windows like the vacant eyes of skulls. The wind whistled through them, carrying what sounded like the whispers of the men they had lost. Miller was pale, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists, but he walked toward the designated observation tower with the grim resignation of a man marching to his own execution. Jack and Rostova set up in a derelict command bunker half a mile away, screens flickering with the live feed from Miller's hidden camera. With them, silent and coiled, was Ghost. Thorne arrived with the unhurried confidence of a king surveying his domain. "Private Miller," he began, his voice laced with a predatory amusement that the microphone picked up with perfect clarity. "Still chasing ghosts, I see. What bauble have you brought for me today?" As Miller began his nervous pitch, the trap snapped shut. But it was for them. From the shadows of the crumbling buildings, figures emerged. Not soldiers, but men in tactical gear, armed with assault rifles, moving with the fluid efficiency of private contractors, mercenaries from Argent Defense. Thorne smiled, a cold reptilian expression. "You are an insignificant footnote, Miller," he said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "A loose end, and I have always been a man who believes in a tidy narrative." In the bunker, Jack's world narrowed to the screen. He saw the guns raised, saw the terror in Miller's eyes, and every instinct in his body screamed. He's going to execute him right there, he snarled, grabbing his rifle. Jack, no! The backup isn't here yet, Rostova yelled. But it was too late. Jack was already out of the bunker, a ranger moving toward the sound of the guns, a lone warrior charging into the heart of the enemy's fortress. The world exploded into a cacophony of gunfire. Jack, using the crumbling ruins as cover, fought with a chilling muscle memory grace. He was no longer a prisoner or a victim. He was a weapon. The very weapon Thorn had helped to forge, now turned against his creator. He moved through the battlefield of his own past. Every angle, every piece of cover, a memory. But he was one man against a dozen. The mercenaries, disciplined and relentless, began to flank him, pinning him down. A round tore through his shoulder. He grit his teeth against the searing pain, knowing he was seconds from being overrun. Thorn watched from the tower, a spectator at a gladiator match he had arranged. He raised a handgun, preparing to deliver the final, killing shot himself. In that moment, Rostova made the decision. It was a lawyer's desperate, final gambit. She threw open the door to their vehicle. "Ghost, get him!" she screamed, her voice raw with desperation. What happened next was not the action of a dog. It was the unleashing of a force of nature. Ghost erupted from the vehicle, a blur of black and tan fury, his paws tearing up the earth. He ignored the gunfire, ignored the mercenaries. His golden eyes were locked on a single target. He was judgment incarnate, a living embodiment of loyalty, hurtling toward the source of all betrayal. He hit Thorn with the force of a freight train, a 70-pound missile of muscle and teeth. The handgun flew from Thorn's grasp as he crashed to the ground. Ghost stood over him, not barking, but with a low, terrifying growl that promised death, his fangs inches from Thorn's throat. The mercenaries froze, their professional cool shattered by the primal, unexpected violence. In that instant of hesitation, Jack and the newly arrived MPs swarmed them, and the firefight was over. Jack walked toward the tower, his rifle steady, ignoring the fire in his shoulder. He stood over his former commander, who was pinned to the ground, paralyzed with terror, beneath the unblinking gaze of the war dog. And Thorn, the master manipulator, the man of iron control, finally broke. His arrogance shattered into a million pieces of panicked, self-serving babble, a desperate confession that poured out of him, naming Andrew Vale, naming Argent Defense, admitting to everything, all of it captured with perfect damning clarity by the wire on Miller's chest. The last stand was over. The god had fallen, and the ghosts of Nightingale could finally rest. The confession from Colonel Thorn was not a key. It was a stick of dynamite that blew the doors off a generation of corruption. The aftermath was a cleansing fire. News headlines screamed with a mixture of outrage and fascination. Andrew Vale, the untouchable CEO of Argent Defense, was led away in handcuffs, his billion-dollar suit looking cheap and powerless. High-ranking officials at the Pentagon were relieved of their commands, their careers dissolving overnight in a storm of disgrace. The story of Sergeant Jack Callahan, the hero framed by his own, was on every channel. The world loves a story of redemption, and they had found their new champion. But as Jack watched the news from a quiet borrowed room, he felt a profound and unsettling disconnect. The world was celebrating a victory he couldn't feel. They saw a hero, a symbol of justice prevailing. He saw only the ghosts of the men who had paid the price for that justice. The public triumph felt like a hollow echo of the very real, very private loss that lived in his bones. This wasn't his victory. The victory belonged to the dead, and the dead couldn't claim it. So he would have to. His war wasn't over. The final, most difficult mission was just beginning. He turned off the television, silencing the chorus of empty praise. With Ghost sitting as a silent sentinel at his side, Jack Callahan embarked on a personal pilgrimage. His journey took him not to Washington for medals and commendations, but to the quiet, forgotten towns across America where the real cost of Operation Nightingale was still being paid every single day. His first stop was a small, tidy house in rural Pennsylvania. He knocked on the door, and it was opened by a woman with kind eyes and a face etched with a sorrow so deep it had become a part of her. She was the mother of Private First Class Diaz, the youngest man in Jack's unit, a kid who had still been quoting his high school football coach on the day he died. The woman looked at Jack, her eyes searching his. She had been told her son died because of a traitor's actions, Jack's actions. Jack stood on her porch, not as a hero, but as a commander, bearing the truth, a burden heavier than any rucksack. He didn't offer excuses or platitudes. He sat in her living room, surrounded by photos of a smiling young man in uniform, and he told her everything. He told her about her son's courage. He told her how her son had saved another man's life just moments before he fell. And then, his voice thick with a pain that would never leave him, he told her that her son had not died in a mission that failed, but had been sacrificed in a mission that was designed to fail. He told her that her son had been betrayed by the very men who had sent him there. Tears streamed down the mother's face, not just tears of grief, but new tears of a terrible, clarifying pride. Her son wasn't a victim of a clumsy operation. He was a hero betrayed. In that shared, sacred moment of truth and pain, a small piece of honor was restored. Jack left that house feeling not lighter, but more whole. He repeated this journey again and again, in town after town, facing the families, absorbing their grief, and giving them the only thing he had left to offer, the truth of their son's sacrifice. And in that pilgrimage, the true meaning of his own survival became clear. Honor, he realized, is not something awarded to you on a parade ground. It is not a medal you pin to your chest or a headline in the news. True honor is a silent currency exchanged between soldiers in the dark moments before dawn. It's the quiet promise to carry a brother's memory, to ensure his sacrifice was not in vain. It is the sacred duty to speak for the dead when they can no longer speak for themselves. That was the price of honor, and Jack paid it willingly. Months later, the world had moved on. The headlines had faded, but Jack Callahan had not. He was a civilian now, the rigid discipline of the army replaced by a new, quieter purpose. He stood on a grassy hill, bathed in the warm light of a setting sun. Below him, a group of veterans, men and women with haunted eyes and unseen scars, were working with dogs. The dogs were veterans too, powerful shepherds and retrievers retired from military service. This was the Nightingale Project, a foundation Jack had built from the ground up, a sanctuary where the unbreakable bond between soldier and dog was being forged anew, not for war, but for healing. He threw a worn tennis ball, and Ghost, his friend, his partner, his savior, bounded after it with the pure, unburdened joy of a creature at peace. Jack watched him, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. The ghosts of Afghanistan would always be with him, but they no longer walked in front of him. They walked beside him, as guardians. He had not erased his past, but he had given it a new meaning. He had taken his pain and transformed it into a purpose. He had taken his loyalty and turned it into a legacy. His war, all his wars, were finally over. He was home. In the quiet golden light of that evening, as we leave Sergeant Jack Callahan and his loyal friend Ghost, we are left with more than just the end of a story. we are left with the powerful echo of a truth that every person, in their own way, comes to understand. The story of Jack Callahan is the story of two wars. The first was fought in the dust and fire of a foreign land, a war of tactics, of survival, of brotherhood forged in the crucible of combat. That war had a clear enemy and a visible end. But the second war, the one that followed him home, was the harder fight. It is a war that countless veterans know intimately. It is the war fought not with bullets, but with memories. A war waged not against a visible enemy, but against the ghosts of betrayal and the deafening silence of a world that can never fully comprehend. It is the war fought not for territory, but for a place to call home within your own soul. Jack's journey reminds us of what honor truly is. It is not the weight of the medals on a uniform, nor the roar of a crowd hailing a hero. Honor is a silent internal compass. It is the brutal integrity to face the truth when the world is content with a lie. It is the unwavering courage to keep a promise to the fallen, to speak their names and defend their memory long after their voices have gone silent. It is the price paid in quiet moments of reflection, the steadfast refusal to let sacrifice be in vain. This is the honor that cannot be awarded, nor can it ever be taken away. And in the heart of this storm of human deception, there was Ghost, a creature of pure, incorruptible loyalty. In a world of complex lies, his truth was simple. Stand by the one you serve. His instincts became the key that unlocked a conspiracy crafted by human intellect. It's a powerful testament to a bond that goes beyond words, a reminder that sometimes the most profound guidance comes not from a strategic plan, but from the unwavering heart of a faithful friend. Perhaps the story of Jack and the Nightingale Project teaches us the most important lesson of all. It teaches us that our deepest wounds can become our greatest strengths. He did not simply seek to reclaim his own life. He chose to build a new one, dedicated to healing the very wounds he understood so well. He transformed his own trauma into a sanctuary for others, turning his pain into purpose. That is the ultimate victory. Not just to survive, but to find a new way to serve, a new mission in peace that gives meaning to the sacrifices of war. In our own lives, we all face our own battles. We have all known the sting of betrayal, the challenge of standing for what is right against the odds, and the profound comfort of a loyal friend. Jack Callahan's story is a mirror, reflecting the resilience of the human spirit and its incredible capacity to find light in the deepest darkness. If stories of honor, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the fires of adversity matter to you, then you have found a home here. Help us to continue honoring these narratives. Give this video a like to show your support, share it with someone who understands the price of honor, and subscribe to NX Incredible Stories to become part of a community that believes these stories must be told. Thank you for watching.